401k is a sacred cow, man. People think we've been funding 401k since Adam and Eve when they're really like 40 years old.
The problem is it gives people false hope. They think, oh, cool, I'm going to fund this and I'm going to be able to retire. 95% of people can't retire. So they're funding it. They're now involved in the market. They know little about the market, just like their companies knew little about the market. The market has continued to be overhyped and underperforming.
I think that everybody should consider how much further down would it have to go for you to just be like, this is absolutely unacceptable, and consider a trailing stop loss. Now, the trailing part probably doesn't matter as much because it's mostly going down. Trailing is usually when it's going up. If it goes up by a certain percentage, it still follows it. But it says after a certain percentage drop, it automatically sells.
So even at this point in the market, like you would encourage someone to put on a trailing stop loss?
Well, I still think that we've got
a ways to go down.
You know, I mean,
that's the tricky part when people are having
businesses aren't going to make it, Amanda. They're just not going to make it through.
So unfortunate.
It's frustrating, right? It's sad. Like I want to be an advocate
small family
to help them
business.
out, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be other businesses that don't make it because they were already holding on.
Yeah.
So we have to really take that into consideration and just even question whether, when we're investing in the stock market, whether we have the stomach for that level of volatility, right? Because this isn't unprecedented. You know, we can go back to the 80s with Black Monday. We could go, to the Great Depression and what happened during that time. The Great Recession of 2008. Like these types of things happen. And I just did a video that we'll make sure at the end to let people know about, because I talk about what happens when a business goes out and how it makes us feel like we got better returns than we actually did because of the way they calculate it. That's really frustrating. And that a lot of the return that we hear about in the market, because it really hasn't done amazing since the year 2000. I mean, it's like a 6% return. People are still quoting these old returns of 8 to 10%, which really got boosted up because of the 90s. And so we're kind of with old philosophies doing new things or doing the same things. And the new philosophies are actually hurting us by just handing our money over.
401k is a sacred cow, man. People think we've been funding 401k since Adam and Eve when they're really like 40 years old, And
the real reason they came out is pretty fascinating, because they came out more because pensions failures.
Right.
And because it was the right plan. Like, you got to realize companies, like what happened was companies wanted to recruit high talent. They wanted to recruit the best. In order to recruit the best, they created pensions. Hey, come work for us. We want to get you here. We'll pay you after, your working years are over. And this is a time where people aren't living at the age that they're living to now, especially in America. So what happens is people find out about these executives getting pensions. Like, hey, that's unfair. I want pensions. So then we get the government. then all of a sudden everybody's getting pensions, right?
Right.
And by the way, the reason why pensions got decimated is because they were reliant upon the stock market performing at 8.7%, I believe.
Wow.
8.4, and it didn't. Everybody says it averages 10. So that's why those things collapsed, is because the stock market, they were running off numbers of the 90s, which were astronomical and a pipe dream today. So it was the stock market that really killed the pensions more than anything. And it's like, I read a book called The Fate of the States. Pensions collapsed certain towns in California because they had to pay the pensions before they could pay the police force.
Wow.
And it really created major problems where some of these places you could only report a crime if it was in progress. And it was crazy. Right. So as we look at this, the movement was companies couldn't afford the pensions. So they started saying, well, match on you pay, rather than a defined benefit like a pension where we're telling you what you get in the future, you can contribute and we'll match your contribution. It's less responsibility on the company, more on the individual. And the problem is it gives people false hope. They think, oh, cool, I'm going to fund this and I'm going to be able to retire. 95% of people can't retire. So they're funding it. They're now involved in the market. They know little about the market, just like their companies knew little about the market. The market has continued to be overhyped and underperforming.
The stock market is a set it and forget it. And unfortunately has a false sense of, I'm going to do really well. And it just has let people down for far too long. These people that say it's average 10%, I don't know the last time they calculated it, but they're far off.
Yeah.
We did a video with Tim Carden where we analyzed the 15 days of volatility right when the market started to be volatile with the coronavirus. And we found that the average return versus what actually happened was quite a bit different because of volatility, because of fees.
Another reason I don't invest in the stock market, and I'll never invest in the stock market again, is there's a lot of misinformation. For one, let's say we've got average return versus actual return. Average return is not what you're actually experiencing, it's just doing math. And math and money don't always equal the same thing. So if I had 100 grand and I lose 10%, I'm all the way down to $90,000. Now, if I earn 10% and I turn on the news and they say, the market's rallied, it's come back, you've earned your 10% back, I only made 10% on $90,000, which means I'm not back to my original $100,000 investment, I'm at $99,000, $1,000 short. But wait, it gets even worse because they don't refund the fees they charge to manage that money. Right? Even if it's an index fund, there's some degree of fees. If it's inside of a retirement plan, there's also legal fees, admin fees, all sorts of additional fees on top of what you're paying for the funds. And so I might be down at $96,000 because of all the fees that have now come out of the plan. I don't like that type of a situation. I think the economy is too volatile to be risking my capital, and I don't like the notions of, dollar cost average. If you haven't heard of the dollar cost average term, all that's saying is put your money in every single month, because sometimes the market's up, sometimes it's down, and you're gonna buy at an average price if you just consistently put your money away. The mantra, invest early, often, and always. Right? Regardless of the outcome, if you're just patient enough, if you just ride it out, it should be okay in the long haul. But let's look, how many people are actually okay in the long haul? When you look at people that are investing their money that are older than you, or if you're a retiree and watching this, did it work out how you wanted? Interest rates have been so low for so long, that's been great for business owners and borrowing money. It's been kind of terrible for those people that are out there going, hey, I'm trying to earn interest for retirement income and be safe with my cash. So that's been part of the letdown. So if we look at Enron, this company that was a big-time energy company that you'd hear about all the time, it was just fabricating their numbers. They weren't creating actual value. They were lying in order to create false shareholder value, but as soon as everybody knew it was a lie, and once that was exposed, it went from being worth a bunch of money one day to being worth nothing overnight. Because when you're buying on the first end, right, on the IPO, when it first comes out, the initial public offering, there's a value that's set, and it either goes up or down from there. So you can determine whether you want to buy it. After that, you're buying it on the secondary market, either through a mutual fund or through that individual stock. You're buying from someone who's already bought it before, and that's only worth what people are willing to pay for it. Now, if all of a sudden they know it's a lie, they know it's a fraud, they're not willing to pay anything for it. It's only buying on the information that we have access to, and there's so much information out there. There's so many things happening. There's so many degrees removed from what's actually going on versus what's being reported on the news, and we're taking far too much risk. Now, if this was working, that would be one thing, but it's not. It's been a failed financial experiment, a failed financial system, and this is why we're not seeing people become more financially independent. This is why we're seeing people work so hard, take all that hard work and set capital aside in something they don't know or understand, which is highly speculative and risky, and then getting to the place where they don't have time for the money to grow anymore because now it's retirement time and they live a worse lifestyle than expected. That's not a retirement dream. It's a retirement nightmare. I'll give a second example on that. See, if you had $1,000 and you earn 100%, it grows to $2,000. That's awesome. But if the next year it loses 50%, 50% off of 2,000 takes you back to 1,000. That's a 0% rate of return. See, averages, that's like if this morning I decided to take a shower and I had two shower heads, one on my left and one on my right. I turned one freezing cold and the other one scalding hot. On average, I'm at a lukewarm temperature, but in reality, I'm miserable as hell.
84% of the returns in the market get made by 10% of the investors.
Oh, that's so tragic.
Is that companies go out of business and then they're zeroed out on whoever was invested in them at that time, but then they just replace them in the S&P 500 or the Dow, and then they just take the new company and what they're getting and show that as the future return, but that's not the actual return for someone who already had money.
That feels so shady to me.
It's just that math and money are not the same thing. And people don't really get informed on this because we're told to set it and forget it, invest early, often, and always, dollar cost average, we're in it for the long haul, high risk equals high return, it takes money to make money. Yeah. This is a book I wrote in 2008 called Killing Sacred Cows, and people can grab that, 44222, if they text that number and put wealthier in the subject line. They can download that book on me, or they can go to wealthfactory.com/megakit, MEGAKIT, and they can download it. Resources. And then my other book, What Would the Rockefellers Do? Everybody that's followed that advice is texting and emailing because they're not losing money on the market downturn right now.
Right.
They're not losing anything, and they have access to that cash without a 10% penalty. And at this point, it's outperformed the market for the last 20 years.
What people sometimes don't understand is like the drag on their match.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, I put 3% in, they match me 3%. It's like, well, do you know what the cost is on the mutual funds you have in there? Is there an investment advisor charging another 1% on top of the 1% you're probably already paying? What are the fees for the plan? And, oh, by the way, what about access to the money? Because to me, that's almost the most important thing.
Well, I'm just curious, if there's all of these fees that you're talking about, how does someone go about determining if they're being charged 3% plus an additional 1% plus another additional 1%? You know, like it feels like you could read the contract and still be a bit confused about it. So if someone's starting out, how do they decipher?
So this 100% will be a future episode that we do. But the easiest thing on mutual funds is go to Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg or something and put in your ticker symbol and just look for something called an expense ratio. And it's like, this is one of your fees, not all of them.
There could be 12B1 fees. So the second way to do it, because we won't answer the whole question here, but this is an eye-opening for people. You get a calculator and you put in the calculator how much you've contributed and what the actual net increase was on the statement. And you're going to see it's different than what they tell you your percentage was, because they're telling you the average percentage, or they're telling you the gross percentage, not accounting for fees and volatility. And that's a simple way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and so the way I describe this is the numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
So if you do what Garrett's talking about, you can work backwards, and maybe that's your fees. Maybe it's not your fees, but it's all of them accumulated. Like the numbers don't lie. What's my rate of return?
We're going to have Brian pull out a computer in episodes and show how the match doesn't give 100% return.
Yeah.
See, it would have to match all the dollars in the plan all the time, every year, not just the new deposits. So imagine I have $100,000 in the account. I put an extra $3,000 in the next year. They match $3,000. If I put that in a money market, okay, that's increases $6,000 in that account. The reality was that's only a 3% improvement to the $100,000 on what they matched. Even though it doubled what I put in, it would be no different than getting 3% on that account, right?
Okay.
But everybody's looking at, well, that's free money. That's 100% return. And it gets into something for nothing. We don't think about it. We just automatically do it. And I like to do the analysis. And look, I'm not as much a numbers guy as most people think. I'm a conceptual guy. I think conceptually how it works. And then I validate or invalidate the concept based upon what the numbers tell me.
Based on the math.
Most people look at numbers without any accuracy, because we can't project 30 years from now. Who the hell knows? And yet people make decisions on that. I like to kind of reverse engineer and see what happens when I make a deposit and this happens. How much does it really go up? Might go up 2-3%. It doesn't go up 100% like the memes and the cliches and the conversation happens.
So one of the scary things for me when I'm just advising people on their money is when they're making their decisions based on rate of return. It's like, wait, is that the only thing you're thinking about? Because that sounds like 100% rate of return, right? I put these dollars in and then I get these other dollars that are not mine. And it's like, do you really actually think that's all that's going on in that big picture? Because it's not true.
Right, because we're talking about restrictions, when it's vested, what else is happening in your life, incentivizing you to do something like that. Kind of like people who go, oh, I got to get a mortgage because I get a tax deduction. Well, I don't know if that's the best decision, because do you really want a home? Do you want all the maintenance that comes with the home? And is the home going to cash flow? And I think that's one of the major considerations we're talking about here today with Roxy is how do you create more cash flow? And if you can learn to create more cash flow, you're going to be in a superior position than accumulation and waiting and hoping in 30 years it's going to work out and telling everybody that you're going to get free money.
But you said this in Budgeting Sucks. You said when you have loans and investments, you may be earning less interest from your investments than you're paying on your loans. So for listeners, it's easy to imagine somebody who might have $50,000 in a 401k. Let's say it's returning 3 to 6%. And then they might have $50,000 in credit card debt that they're paying 16 to 24% APR. And the answer is staring them in the face in this sacred cow of the 401k that they refuse to touch. So am I right about that? Do I have that correct?
I mean, and yet they just don't think about it. They just go, yeah, well, I just fund my 401k.
You can't touch that. That's accumulation.
Like, come on, man, you're losing money with every deposit you make in there. There's people with 17%, 22% credit cards.
Yeah.
And they're still funding their 401k.
Right.
Your 401k is not making that.
Not even close.
One of the things that will blow people's minds, I mean, if I pulled up software, is like a lot of people are like, yeah, but I'm getting matched. That's free money. I'm like, well, is it free money? Because there's strings attached. You usually have to work a place for a certain amount of time. It's not always immediately vested. 2, it's depending upon the underlying returns and you don't have losses on the market once the money goes in. 3, it's not fueling it at 100% because they're only matching new dollars going in, not the existing funds that are already in there. So I did a lot of analysis on that back in the Killing Sacred Cows days, and it's not as good as people think.
Years ago, I wrote an article for Forbes. And in that article, it wasn't my content. I interviewed someone because they had developed a program for organizations to match paying down a student loan. So if someone put 3% of their income towards a student loan, the employer could match the 3% just like they might a 401k. And I feel like paying off a student loan right now is so much more valuable to the psyche than trying to fund a retirement plan. And look, that might be heresy from a financial person.
Well, I don't think so. So, my girlfriend right now is looking at all of her student loans, and the interest rate for those student loans are more than a car is, more than a mortgage is.
What kind of interest rate are we talking about?
Right now, about 6 to 7%.
6 to 7%. If we look at what the market actually does, take the 90s out and look at the market in any other 10-year period, you're going to be better off paying off a loan with certainty. It can improve your cash flow. You're getting a guaranteed savings versus a non-guaranteed earnings.
Yes.
So it really comes down to personal preference. If an employer really wants to do the best for the employee, it's about getting them one-on-one time to build a customized plan. And if you want to match, guess what? If you match them on any of the customized plan, whether it's paying off loans or the own types of investments that they want to get into, it's still the same write-off for the employer.
Cool.
And I've had people say, there's more 401k millionaires now than ever. I'm like, oh, really? Well, let's talk about that. Let's dissect that for just a minute. You said you need $5,300 to eat organic and live pretty healthy, right?
Sure. Yep.
If you had $1 million right now, based upon the interest rates that are out there that people can earn in a 401k, guess what the average amount is being paid out of a 401k to a retiree with $1 million right now?
I have no idea.
$25,000 to $30,000 a year. So you're a millionaire on paper, but not living like one.
No.
These interest rates are so low. So,
I mean, that's less than half of what I would need.
Yeah. So you have to now have $2 million. And by the way, what if in 10 years from now, you need to adjust that for inflation?
Sure.
Maybe $3 million that you need. So it's a moving target. It's not performing. And yet people still believe in these plans, but they've failed people far too often. The first thing that it tells people on is it lies to them and says you're going to save tax. Well, how are you going to save tax? You put money into the plan pre-tax, but you have to pay taxes when you pull it out. What happens if taxes go up? The government's $23 trillion in debt right now. What if they raise taxes in the future?
Mm-hmm.
We've had over a 50% highest tax rate on average since the inception of the taxes in 1913. So from 1944 all the way to 1981, the tax brackets were above 50%, right? Yeah. So like right now we're historically low. The second thing is, if it takes more money because of inflation to buy things in the future, you're going to pay more tax because you got to have more money to buy the same things. So you're paying more in tax. So that's another issue. And here's my question. Do you want to live off less money in the future? Like that whole notion that people can live off 70% at retirement. Do you want less money in the future? That seems crazy. Yeah. So I don't think people are going to be in a lower tax bracket. So all we're doing is delaying our taxes, not saving our taxes in these plans. We're not getting cash flow along the way. We're investing in a market that has been underperforming for a decade now. Really, since 2000, the stock market's been a disappointment. So it's really been 2 decades. Yeah. We've had small run-ups, but overall, the returns are not close to what people think when they look at the actual returns.
Right.
And by the time we account for fees and inflation, it's been horrendous. And so I think that it's just something that people are buying into the 1990s in the year 2020. And it's going to disappoint them severely if they don't question it. And they'd be better off paying off their loans. They'd be better off putting some money in savings accounts so they have a little bit of liquidity. And they'd be better off putting that money in themselves so they can earn more money and then go to cash flow banking to store their money and then invest in something that they understand beyond that. Yes. Where's the place you can invest?
There's going to be a lot of people that pay a lower tax rate this year than normal because there's going to be a lower earning. I know people are getting, loss of jobs right now or cut 15% on their salary. So if you were going to cash out, yes, there's a 10% penalty for cashing out, but that's one time 10% if you're under 59.5. I look at it like if I were to give you a loan right now and I just charge you 10% for the life of the loan, not a bad interest rate on that loan if it was a 30-year loan. Right. It's like 1/3% per year if we look at it that way. So I wouldn't mind considering that. For me, if it was me, I'd be fine paying the penalty. I'd be fine, making that change. You could even move to a Roth conversion as a one-time thing, right? So that you could still have some tax-free growth off of some money like that. You could just cash out and have even more control than that. Or as he said, roll that over to another type of a brokerage type of IRA because it's a former employer. That's why I just took the 10% penalty. Still, but this is what I thought. I'm like, okay, imagine I'm willing to give you a loan today.
Yes.
And I'm only going to charge you interest once. And it's the first year, but the rest of the time I'm never charging you again. Yeah. And you need this money for 20 years, let's say. Would you rather pay me a percentage like 3% for the life of the loan or 10% up front and never pay again?
10% up front.
Yeah. So I just look at the 10% penalty as
one-time hit.
All right, one-time hit.
Yeah.
That was what it cost to get access to my money. The reality is taxes are going to go up by more than that in the future in my mind anyway. So I'll just take the hit. I took the hit. Didn't think twice about it. Like I said, I didn't invest it. I just put it into a yard.
Yeah. So the 10% penalty is kind of, to me, the thing that really matters. Because to me, on those buckets of cash, you don't get to choose if you pay tax. You get to choose when.
Right.
So it's like, well, okay. So you're just choosing when, but is it worth the 10% on top of the when?
And she says, I enjoyed the segment about cashing out your 401k. If one opts for a 72T election before 59.5, my understanding is that they can change their mind about it when they reach 59.5. Is this correct? I'll let you answer that and then I'll go into the second part. Okay.
So 72T is a election on IRAs that says, I want to get to this money before 59.5. Now, amidst COVID, you don't even have to do that election. You can just get up to $100,000 without the 10% penalty. You could pay the tax this year, or you could pay it over the next 3 years.
You get to decide.
Yeah, it depends on what your income is going to be like and those types of things. A 72T says you're going to take cash flow that's substantially equal from your retirement plan for a minimum of 5 years or till 59.5, whichever is a longer period of time.
Okay.
So if Kathy was 58 and started this, she has to go for 5 years. So she's going to be in her, 63 essentially before that stops.
Okay.
Even though she's past 59.5. So it's a minimum 5 years.
Yeah.
After that, you can definitely stop. So if you start at 52 and then at age 59.5, you want to stop, you can completely shut it down as far as taking that out at 59.5.
Okay. When is it a good situation to do the 72T?
When you want to get that money out of there without penalty and you want to create tax offsets along the way rather than taking the tax hit all at once when you pull it out.
So the $100,000 that people can take out, you're like, go for it. Get $100,000.
Kind of my feeling, but there's going to be tax on that still.
What's the tax on? What percentage are we talking?
Depends on the person's tax bracket.
Oh,
so they're just going to pay whatever their taxes are. They could do it this year or over a 3-year period of time. But I'll just give them some cool ideas because there's a lot of IRS notices that have come out that might offset that. Is now the year that you go, okay, I'm going to pay less tax. Maybe this is the time to get access to my money or move to a self-directed. Really you can roll that over to a self-directed. There's no tax upon that rollover. Right? It just moves to a different type. And it might be, if you move it to a Roth, there would be tax. And if you pay it out of the account, that could create a penalty. Or if you pay it out of your pocket, there wouldn't be, but that could start to harm someone's liquidity. She
said, would you explain the pros and cons of putting the 401k funds into an annuity and receiving payments? I am considering doing this while the market is up to lock in gains, get a contractual rate of return, and quote unquote, miss the inevitable market correction downturn.
So annuities inside of a retirement plan, one of the problems are you could be paying fees on the retirement plan and paying fees on the annuity. So that's one concern. So if you can go to like a self-directed that doesn't have much fee for the IRA structure. And then there's different types of annuities. There's fixed annuities, which right now are just paying so low of interest.
Okay.
And you're locking your money away. There's an immediate annuity that she might be looking at that 30 days later starts annuitizing and paying cash flow for the rest of your life. But you just got to measure how much cash flow is that? Is it worth tying my money up into that? Because a lot of people start using annuities. They were originally intended for not outliving your money, but then they just became accumulation vehicles. And there's a lot of these variable annuities that'll say, we'll guarantee a certain payout if you annuitize. But most people don't like annuitizing because now you're stuck with, that's the payment for the rest of your life.
Got it.
So if you're like, well, I want the lump sum, sorry, that's not available anymore. So a very small percentage of people actually annuitize. I think if you are going to annuitize, that might be the place an annuity makes sense. But what I've seen is with indexed annuities that say, okay, we're going to give you a minimum interest rate and participate in some upside of the market. They cap that really low. So you don't get a lot of upside on it anymore.
Yeah.
Used to be better years ago. And it's part of it how they design the policies.
Okay. That seems like a common theme.
Yeah, not getting too technical here, but there's something called the zero coupon bond. Just I'll give the basics of it. They're not all designed this way.
That.
Zero coupon bond is I buy something now, and in the future it matures, and it's this amount. There's no interest paid along the way. It's just, boom, I get this at the end.
Okay.
So they might buy that, right? And that funds their guarantee, let's say. Then they use options on the market for the rest. So if the market goes up, because they're using leverage, they get more. If the market goes down, they lose more, but they got that zero coupon bond backing them up.
Okay.
So because interest rates have been so stinking low, they can't participate as much in the stock market as they want with the options trading.
Yeah.
So you just see where someone might only get a maximum of 7%, and there might be a year where the market does 20. You get cut off at 7, but you're getting no loss on the downside. Or there's other annuities that say, hey, we've given you all these guarantees if you annuitize. So you got to measure some of those things, right? There's a lot of catches and caveats. I think that they can be okay vehicles for people who are at retired ages and looking for cash flow. I think as an accumulation vehicle, we have to really understand the fees and the design. And there are some private annuities, and we've got people in our network that have analyzed annuities. It's nothing I get paid on or researched, but so I know a little bit, but I wouldn't call myself a comprehensive expert to keep up with them from time to time. There was a time where I felt like they were really good because I knew the market felt overvalued, but interest rates were such that you could get these to participate more. Yeah, I don't know. I hate having annuity fees inside of retirement plan fees. So if you can minimize the fees on both through a private annuity, or through a self-directed IRA that has just an annual fee versus a percentage fee, and then just know if you can handle the annuitization.
Okay. What?
You learned something right there, didn't you?
I did. A lot of that was new for me. And I'm just wondering, for people who are starting out, can you just describe and I guess give a definition of what an annuity is?
So, like life insurance is if you die prematurely, here's a lump sum of money.
Yeah.
Annuity is, what if you retired at age 60, but the market went up and down, and all of a sudden during the downturn, you run out of money? An annuity is the insurance for not outliving your money. So it would pay out until the day you die.
Okay.
So what if you live longer than expected? They're still making payments.
Several of these people have watched you on the Money Revealed question and answer. They have read
pulled
your
the garbage can over, threw up in it as I talked about these plans, made them sick for their stomach.
There's a lot of concern and just questions about, now that I'm aware that this is not maybe the best plan, the best thing to do with my money, now how do I liquidate it? And how do I avoid the penalties, or keep as much of the money as I put in as I can? So help people understand, if they want to exit, how do they exit, and the safest, quote unquote, way to do that.
So one of the unfun answers is you're probably not going to get out of some of the tax and penalty if you actually want to exit. But there are different ways you can do that. The first thing on 401ks is most of the time you have to not be employed there anymore to actually access the money.
Unless they specifically write that it's okay to roll it over or move it while you're employed, which not many do.
Yeah, unless you own the company, you can't change those rules. And why the heck would some large financial institution like build that in there so that you could actually take your money?
Right.
So if you're still employed, you may have some serious issues there. You can do loans.
Yeah, you can borrow, but then my concern with borrowing is there's a specific payback period that if you don't pay back, you could get triggered the penalty.
Correct.
Right? And second is you now have to take your after-tax dollars to pay back a loan that's pre-tax.
Correct.
Does that make sense? So you borrow $5,000.
Yeah.
And that money hasn't been taxed yet, but then you got to take your tax dollars to pay that back.
Yeah.
Which might only be $3,500 to pay back your $5,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the loans. If you're not employed any longer, 30 days is the typical window. Yeah. You have to exit employment, wait 30 days, then you can access the money. From there, you can roll it to an IRA, which is a tax neutral event. So pre-tax to pre-tax.
Right. So there's no tax when you roll to an IRA.
You're not really changing anything. It's just pre-tax this money bucket, pre-tax this money bucket.
It's a clean transition between the two.
Right.
Correct. Actually getting out, it will trigger.
Unless you're over 59 and a half.
Well, there's a 10% penalty over 59 and a half, but regardless of whether you're 9 years old or 90 years old, it's going to come out as regular income.
Right.
Okay.
Because you never paid tax on it going in. So I think we all intuitively know the government wants their money, right? They're going to get their slice of the pie. So you pay tax on the way out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so some people before they're 59 and a half, they're interested in moving it to a Roth rather than a traditional IRA, but you pay tax on the year that you make that conversion. So it can become a more tax-friendly environment than just purely tax deferred. It might have a tax-free nature to it, but you pay tax to do that. And if you pay it from inside the plan, there's a penalty if you're before 59 and a half. So you could move it to a tax-free environment, but you'd have to write the check now. But the reason you might do that is you plan on making more money in the future. You have a year off.
Yeah. We've talked about some of these myths or myths is maybe not the right word, but the fact that financial advisors talk about you making less money
that would be terrible.
Future,
that's terrible news.
I sure as hell hope I don't.
Right.
Make less
Things
money
are more expensive in the future. And if I have more time to buy stuff.
Yeah.
Just press that Amazon button.
That's the problem, Stolba. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's like, do I really want to make half as much later in my life? And oh, by the way, right now we're at the lowest tax rate in my lifetime.
Right.
So if you're considering to pull the trigger and want to make more money in the future and all, it's like, well, maybe the time's right.
Right. And,
for you.
And there, so you could do that Roth conversion. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the misnomers is people think, well, I make too much money for a Roth because there are, but to do a rollover, that's not the case. Doesn't really matter how much you make.
It's a Roth conversion. And they don't charge you the 10%. You just have to pay the tax on what you've converted.
Outside of the plan. And then there's something that's a little less used that's possible to avoid the 10% penalty, but not the tax. And that's the 72T distribution.
Correct.
Which allows you to take substantially equal payments for a minimum of 5 years or until you're 59 and a half. So longer for you than 5 years. Right.
I'm so young.
And no 10% penalty. But there's 3 different equations that the government gives you that you could take that money from, and you're kind of locked into it. The only thing I think of is, if you have a retirement plan that hasn't been taxed, if you could do something that creates tax offsets, like watching we have tax videos that talk about everything from how you reclassify income to how you maximize deductions, and if you could find ways that you're like, oh, I wasn't taking advantage of this and now I can, then you offset that so that while you're pulling it out, you're creating an additional deduction, but it's separate. It's a cohesive strategy that you're bringing together, not individualistically only within that IRA or that 401k.
Yeah, where there's some offset, or maybe you're like me, where you had a salaried job, everything was W-2, and it's like, hey, I'm going to pull the trigger, become an entrepreneur. Which means this year I'm going to earn.
You're going to have less income.
I'm going to earn nothing.
Yeah.
the first year. It's like, well, maybe that's the time.
Right.
Pull it out.
Well, I remember I referred you a client once, and this client was 61 years old. They were still working, and they happened to have one of those provisions that they could get the money out of their 401k anytime, even though they were employed. So Ryan was like, let's get the match.
Yep.
Let's put the dollars in the next year. Let's just take all this money out because
Yep.
it's vested. So this isn't like dogmatic where we're just like, 401ks are always terrible. You're a horrible human being for funding them. What are you thinking? Although it may sound like that in my old days, but what we're saying is let's just look at the facts here. Let's look at what are your best options? How do we make sure that you know what's going on? So yes, you can roll over. Yes, you could do a Roth conversion. Yes, you could do a 72T distribution. What's the one thing I emailed you about that's like almost all the time people use in divorce when it comes to the 401ks, but I don't think it's exclusive to it. It's expensive though, right?
It is, but also once you have like legal provisions, the courts rule the world that way.
Right.
So then they're like, hey, she gets this amount of money, he gets this amount of money. They separate it. And then on the back end of that, there are certain ways to start a business with a retirement account where they don't charge you certain penalties or charge you no tax.
Down payment on a first-time home. I mean,
down payment on a
lot
first-time
of
home,
strings and restrictions.
Yeah.
But we've done some really creative things just to give people insight. Like someone does a charitable remainder trust where they take like a business or a piece of real estate and they donate it to a charity. They get a tax deduction for that. That's a partial tax deduction based upon the overall gift. They get to sell that tax-free, goes to the charity after they die. So while they're alive, they get to take an income off of it. Now, if people have never heard of that, it's probably blowing their mind, but ultimately that tax deduction can be taken that year plus 5 additional years against up to half of their adjusted gross income. So that might create that offset to get some of the money out of the IRA.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So anyone watching this, CRUT or a CRAT is kind of what you want to go look up to understand what Garrett was just talking
CRA.
about.
If you're at a small enough firm, go to your employer and say, you know what, I'm trying to build up 6 months of liquidity, or I want to pay off my student loans. If there's another place, would you match that if I stop contributing to the 401k? And for that employer, if they're willing to talk directly to the employee, get the same tax benefit. It's the same tax benefit, whether they pay them or whether they put it into the plan. So it's not, and I actually did a Forbes article back in the day on this firm that was creating this automated system that employers could match paying down student loans, which was really cool. If you're willing to be a little bit active, Tim is in the middle today. He was going to be on video with us, but he's buying a business and he's closing on that business in which he has the opportunity to get 100% return on investment in the first 12 months. It's a private business. It's a small business, less than $1 million of revenue. This is where the opportunity is. It's the massive opportunity. You can look at it. You can make contribution to it. You have influence over it. You're not just setting it and handing it over to someone else. And we're going to see these deals pop up more and more because in the type of crazy economy that we're facing right now, there's a lot of people that are running very thin margins and really struggling with their cash flow. And human beings, especially small businesses, don't usually act quick enough because they're looking at a human being and it's hard for them to fire them if there's a cash crunch. You know, we had someone that you brought into the Wealth Factory program that South by Southwest cost him $182,000 when it got canceled.
Just getting crushed with the event space right now.
Right. So it's like, yeah, that's a big deal for a business. So right now, people with cash are willing to get cash or using their retirement funds to buy these businesses can actually be a winning scenario for both parties because otherwise these businesses could be gone. And look, as a customer, not having a business around impacts us. For that person that now lost their money month by month and tried to struggle to make it through, they could lose everything that they've worked for. So it's really time if you have a cash position, if you've got a lot of money in a retirement plan, even if the market's been down 20% on your accounts, well, what if you can go buy a business at a 30% discount and you can get cash flow from it right now and you have control over some of the outcome versus these other things. These are the things to start considering. Want to master your money? Want to figure out the things that you could do to improve your finances? Click here and check out more videos like this on Money Matters.